40 years ago, on November 9th, 1984, the world was introduced to not only one of the biggest horror icons, but one of the biggest names in pop culture history. For the past 4 decades, Freddy Krueger has entered the dreams and nightmares of horror fans across the world, making sure we do our best to live by those now infamous words.
Never sleep again.
Now, working with a budget of just over $1 million, or roughly $3 million today, A Nightmare on Elm Street saw incredible financial and critical success, releasing during the golden age of slashers. You know, at this point, franchises like Halloween and Friday the 13th were becoming extremely popular. But Wes Craven didn't give us another silent stalker in a mask. He introduced us to Freddy Krueger, a killer that likes to have a little more fun with his victims. With the always brilliant Robert Englund as Freddy, horror fans were given a new twist on the genre. And as much as I love the silent stalking nature of a Michael Myers, of a Jason Voorhees, I always appreciate a new kind of killer. And this wasn't somebody who stalks you when you're awake, but rather somebody who kills you in your dreams. I would say more terrifying because everybody has to sleep. It cannot be avoided. And Freddy was so effective in that first movie, people often forget he's only in about 7 to 10 minutes of that runtime, but this is a clear case of less is more. The movie managed to pull in $57 million during its theatrical run, almost 60 times its budget. That would be like if a modern movie made for $100 million, which is pretty average these days, made over $5.7 billion in theaters. It's no wonder they made a sequel.
Stop making sequels! Seriously! I'm tired of it!
And aside from this being the first movie in Johnny Depp's now extensive acting career, where he rocks a killer crop top, by the way, A Nightmare on Elm Street also introduced us to one of the best and most badass final girls in horror movie history, with Heather Langenkamp playing Nancy Thompson, a role that she would go on to reprise in 2 future sequels. And whether or not you love this movie, which if you don't, you're crazy, but whether or not you love the movie itself, I don't think you can really dispute that Nancy is, hands down, one of the best final girls we've ever seen. Like, to me, what makes a good final girl is the amount of trauma she has to fight through, how much chaos she has to get through and still keep kicking, still keep fighting. And Nancy, she's up there with the best of them. Her ordeal is just so unique where all of her friends around her are dying, while none of the parents in the community are listening to a word she says. And beyond that, she's losing her mind from exhaustion because she doesn't want to sleep. And if she so much as dozes off for more than a few minutes, she's probably dead. To me, that makes a pretty badass final girl. And featuring a fun cast of characters, a few creative kills, some truly incredible practical effects, and one of the best killer designs of all time, A Nightmare on Elm Street went on to become an instant fan favorite. And although the franchise went on to create a ton of sequels, most of which aren't very good,
I'll get you, my pretty, and your little soul, too!
there's no denying the impact that this first movie had on horror cinema. It was so big, it was also solely responsible for New Line Cinema's success and them becoming a major Hollywood studio, often being coined the house that Freddy built. Also, when compared to a movie like the original Friday the 13th, these don't all feel like just teenage stereotypes that we're kind of waiting to see get killed. Even somebody like Rod, who might start the movie that way,
I had a hard-on this morning when I woke up, Tina. Had your name written all over it.
even Rod gets some serious character development. You're actively rooting for these characters to make it through. Wes Craven has always been good about giving his characters a little more nuance in his movies. And that's something we'd see again 12 years later with Scream in 1996. And similar to the 2009 Friday the 13th remake, which I don't care what anybody says, is one of the best movies in that franchise, fight me. But similar to that movie, A Nightmare on Elm Street just does such a good job of giving us a little bait and switch. It's actually brilliant by first introducing us to Tina in her dream, setting her up like she's gonna be the heroine of this story. But as we eventually find out, she's actually the first to die. And Freddy's first appearance in Tina's dream really nails that perfect balance of scary and a little bit goofy, letting you know what this killer's about and what we're in for. Like, sure, he'll cut off his own finger and watch the blood ooze out, but he'll do it with a smile and a laugh, so you know he's not such a bad guy. Okay, he is. He's actually fucking horrible. But speaking of Freddy, we even get a little bit of character backstory and motivation for the Nightmare Killer himself. Nancy actually learns who he is when she pulls his hat out of her nightmare into the real world and sees the name Fred Krueger inside it. Because apparently he needed to coat check his hat. I don't know, I guess. And although she denies knowing the name at first, Nancy's mom, who drinks like she's in an 80s hair metal band, eventually tells her the truth, how the parents of this Springwood community got together and literally burned this man alive after learning that he's a child murderer. So naturally, there's his motivation. Now he wants to kill all these parents' kids as an act of revenge. And this just separates it from like a typical slasher. It adds an extra layer of complexity, of morality, because even though this man did truly horrible, horrible things, it still begs the question, were the parents right in what they did? Or was it not their place to decide his fate? And one by one, Freddy slowly picks off Nancy's group of friends, starting with Tina, which leads to Rod getting accused and later arrested for her murder, as he was the only one in the room with her, covered in her blood. That's going to be hard to explain. Freddy then proceeds to take care of Rod by hanging him in his jail cell with a blanket, making it look like an apparent suicide. And finally, he takes out our boy Johnny Depp, or Glenn, in his own bedroom. And after figuring out a plan to pull Freddy out of her nightmare into the real world, Nancy pulls a Kevin McAllister 6 years before Home Alone was a thing, and essentially makes her house like one big booby trap. A gimmick that Wes Craven really seemed to like, as he did something similar 7 years earlier with The Hills Have Eyes. I imagine John Hughes must have been a Wes Craven fan. Now fortunately, Nancy's plan does work, as she's able to pull Freddy into the real world and really do some damage. But unfortunately, it comes at a steep price, as her mom is also killed in the process. Now eventually Nancy realizes that fear is what makes him strong, it's what gives him his power, and by turning her back to him, like Glenn mentioned earlier, Freddy is rendered completely powerless.
What if they meet a monster in their dreams? Then what?
They turn their back on it, take away its energy, and it disappears.
And after failing to kill Nancy and getting beamed up by the USS Enterprise in this awesome 80s static effect, the final scene is unfortunately this tacked on, forced, sequel bait ending that Wes Craven absolutely hated, but he was forced to add it on by producer Robert Shea in the hopes of making sequels. And oh boy did they.
Stop making sequels! Seriously! I'm tired of it!
Endings are definitely not this franchise's strong suit, but this movie just features so many iconic standout moments that still hold up in 2024. Moments like Tina in the body bag, being dragged through the halls of their high school, leaving a trail of blood wherever she goes. Freddy, of course, poking through Nancy's wall, a simple yet effective scene that is completely butchered by CGI in the remake. You have Freddy's first kill in the movie, with Tina being dragged up the walls while Rod watches on in horror. A scene that was actually shot by building a rotating room and nailing all the furniture down. And then of course you have one of the most famous kills in horror history of Glenn, who really needs to invest in some Red Bull, getting pulled into his bed and the geyser of blood that shoots out onto the ceiling. With such a limited budget, the amount of visual flair they were able to pull off was and still is insanely impressive. 40 years later, this franchise is still just as popular, where you have people begging for another remake, as the first year this movie dropped in 1984. And although the quality of the sequels never quite lived up to this original, the creativity of the visual effects and the kills, that always remains strong through the franchise. And those are definitely the highlights of the more, we'll say, painful movies to sit through. To this day, Freddy Krueger remains one of the most iconic killers, brought to life by the performance of Robert Englund. And Heather Langenkamp as Nancy Thompson gave us one of the greatest final girls in horror movie history that we all wanted to see survive A Nightmare on Elm Street. Alright guys, that's gonna do it for me. Let me know what you thought of this certified horror classic down in the comments. Do you love this movie as much as I do, or do you find it to be overrated? A crazy opinion, but hey, I'm willing to hear you out. I have some crazy opinions. Other than that, be sure to leave a like if you liked it. Be sure to leave a subscribe if you loved it, as we have a ton more horror stuff to go over this month. I have some live streams planned with the boys. I also do a weekly podcast with a few friends called Culture Shocked. I'll leave a link for that down in the description of the video. And as always, remember, never sleep again.